So, what do you do when you need to file US taxes or maybe open a bank account, but you don't have a social security number? Well, the answer is actually a special 9-digit number, one that unlocks the US financial system for millions. It's called the ITIN. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what it is and how it works.
I mean, this is a real challenge for a lot of people. Just imagine trying to get your financial life in order in the US, filing taxes, earning interest, building credit, but you feel locked out because you're not eligible for a social security number. So how do you even begin to bridge that gap?
For so many, it honestly feels like you've just hit a wall. All the basic financial pathways that we take for granted, filing taxes, saving money, building your credit score, they all seem to be behind this locked door. And the only key seems to be a social security number. But, and this is the important part, there is a key, and it's one that was designed for this exact purpose. It's the ITIN, and the IRS created it to give people a way to unlock the tax system when they don't have an SSN. Okay, so before we jump into the solution, let's really dig into the problem. Let's understand what these hurdles are that this SSN roadblock actually creates. Without a US taxpayer ID, you run into a bunch of walls pretty fast. First, and most obviously, you can't file the required federal tax return. But from there, the problem just snowballs. You can't open an interest-bearing bank account. You can't apply for credit cards or loans. And what that all means is you're pretty much shut out from building any kind of financial history in the US at all. All right, so now let's talk about that key. The ITIN isn't just some random number. It's a very specific tool, purpose-built by the IRS for the US tax system. So what is it officially? Well, the IRS defines it as a 9-digit tax processing number. And the logic behind it is actually pretty simple. It's for people who have to report taxes to the US government, but for whatever reason, are not eligible to get a social security number. One condition creates the need for the other. It's a direct cause and effect relationship. Now, this right here is probably one of the most important things to understand, because this is where a ton of confusion comes from. An ITIN, that's from the IRS, it's for taxes only, and it always starts with the number 9. An SSN, on the other hand, comes from a totally different agency, the Social Security Administration. And it's all about work authorization and tracking your earnings for benefits. They serve completely different functions. And this just hammers that point home. We need to be crystal clear about this. Having an ITIN does not give you permission to work in the US. It does not make you eligible for Social Security benefits. It doesn't change your immigration status one bit. And you really can't use it as official ID outside of the federal tax system. Its job is taxes, period. Okay, so you figured out you need one. Now for the really practical part. How do you actually go about getting an ITIN? The whole process really boils down to 3 core steps. First, you've got to fill out the Form W-7. Second, and listen, this is absolutely key, you must attach it to a valid US federal tax return. Why? Because that's your proof. It shows the IRS you have a legitimate tax reason for needing the number in the first place. And finally, you have to provide original documents or certified copies, like a passport, to prove your identity and your foreign status. You know, this is a direct quote from the very top of the application form, and it's probably the single most important rule of the whole process. The entire ITIN system is built on one simple idea. The person applying is not eligible for an SSN. If you're eligible for an SSN, you have to go get an SSN, not an ITIN. And here's a detail that a lot of people miss, but it's so important. Let's say you thought you were eligible for an SSN. You applied and you were denied. Well, you can't just turn around and apply for an ITIN. You have to include that official denial letter from the SSA right there with your Form W-7. That letter is your proof that you followed the correct process. So you've gone through the whole process, you've done everything right, and now you have the key. What doors does it actually open? Because this is where the ITIN's value really goes beyond just filing some tax paperwork. All right, benefit number 1, the big one.
is tax compliance. This is its core job. With an ITIN, you can file your required federal tax returns, you can report your income the right way, and importantly, you can claim any refunds you might be owed. But here's where things get really interesting. More and more banks and credit unions are accepting an ITIN, and what that does is unlock access to the formal banking system. It lets you open checking and savings accounts, which, let's be honest, is a huge first step toward financial stability. And that leads us straight to benefit number 3, building credit. A lot of lenders will actually accept an ITIN on applications for things like credit cards and loans. This is a game changer because it allows you to start building a U.S. credit history, which is just essential for so many things down the road, like renting an apartment or even getting better insurance rates. Okay, finally, let's get into the fine print. To manage an ITIN properly, you have to know a few key rules and limitations that aren't always super obvious. Here's a number you really need to keep in mind. If you're applying during the busiest part of tax season, so basically from mid-January to the end of April, you've got to be patient. The IRS says processing can take anywhere from 9 to 11 weeks, so you definitely need to plan around that timeline. This little table really sums up the whole life cycle of an ITIN. So if your ITIN is expiring, no big deal, you just renew it when you file your taxes. Now this next one's important. There's an inactivity rule. If you go 3 straight years without filing a tax return, your ITIN can expire. And last but not least, if you are ever issued a Social Security number, you have to stop using the ITIN right away. From that moment on, the SSN is what you use for everything tax related. So look, if there's just one thing you take away from all this, let it be this. An ITIN is a tool. It's a very specific tool designed to help with tax compliance. It is not, and it was never meant to be, a substitute for a Social Security number. And that kind of brings us to the big picture, right? We've seen how the ITIN unlocks the door to tax compliance, to banking, and even to building credit. But is that really true financial inclusion? Or is it just the first step on what might be a much, much longer journey for people navigating the US financial system from the outside? It's something to think about.